Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mumey.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 241 of the Extra Mile podcast. This is your slightly froggy host, Jackson Mumey. Glad to be with you. And I apologize at the very beginning. As you can tell, I sound pretty bad. I have been really struggling with my traditional twice-a-year post-bar exam cold, and it almost always happens to me right after the bar exam. I just lose it. I just completely get all of that tension and trauma. It seems to work itself out through me at the very end when everybody's been put to bed and the exam is over, and then wham, I get the cold to end all colds twice a year. So there you go. More information probably than you wanted to know. But in any event, I apologize for the sound of my voice, which maybe I should do more often. But in any event, I am glad you're here, and I'm glad to be with you today. I thought we'd do something a little bit different in this week's episode of our podcast. And in today's episode, I'm actually going to do a look at some common search terms in Google for the bar exam. I think you'll be surprised at what people search most frequently, and I'll have some comments about those things. So stick around for that. I think it's an interesting look at what the world writ large is thinking and talking about when it comes to the bar exam. Now, if this is your first time on the podcast with us, I want to welcome you. I'm glad to have you with us. We come to you every week about this time with all things bar exam related. We've done some interviews, lots of interviews. We've got tips and techniques, countdowns to the bar exams, and lots of information. You can watch or listen to these podcasts at just your preference. If you want to watch, go to celebrationbarreview.com/241. That's the episode number. And you'll see the episode in video, plus you'll have the show notes right there. If your preference is to listen to your podcast, you can do that on Apple iTunes, on Spotify, iHeartRadio, just about any place the podcasts are syndicated. And again, there are show notes attached with all of those. And if you'd like to go back into our archives, we've got episodes for, I think, about 4 years now. And you can find them on our website. Just click on the podcast tab at the top of the page. You'll find all of the episodes along with the show notes. And I encourage you to check that out. There's really a wealth of information there. So no matter what way you'd like to get your podcast information, we're glad you found us. Thanks to all of you who continue to recommend the podcast to your friends, classmates, and colleagues. The growth of the podcast over the last few years has been really amazing to me and staggering and very rewarding in terms of just getting feedback and hearing from people. So thank you all very much for that. Now, I know that many of you that are watching or listening today are waiting for your February 2019 bar exam results to be released. The very first edge of those will come in early April. We have a couple of smaller jurisdictions that release very early on. The first large jurisdiction that will release results will be Florida on April 22nd. So we'll keep you informed as those results start to roll out across the country. The results season will last for about 6 weeks. It'll wrap up in late May, typically with some Georgia results and California results. So that's what we're looking at going forward. But for those of you who are planning to take the exam in July 2019 or anytime in 2020, I want to remind you that, as always, this episode is sponsored by our free training class, our webinar called Do Something Different. Make the next bar exam your last bar exam. I want to invite you, if you're going to be taking the bar exam later in 2019 or anytime after that, to join us on Thursday night at 7 p.m. for this free 90-minute training. We're going to walk you through the 4 steps that you have to follow in order to pass the bar exam. There are lots of case studies. There's lots of information for you. It's a step-by-step roadmap to being successful on the exam. And thousands, literally thousands of people have been through this training, and I would encourage and invite you to join us as well. You do need to register in advance. You can do that very easily. There's a link on your show notes, either the video or the audio page, or you can go to our website at celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. That's what you see up on your screen there, celebrationbarreview.com webinar, and you can register. Again, it's 7 p.m. your time on Thursday night. Now, if Thursday night, 7 p.m. doesn't work for you, you'll also see an option for an on-demand version that you can watch at your own convenience. Same great content. I encourage you to check it out either way. So look forward to seeing you for Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam your last bar exam, coming up this Thursday at 7 p.m. All right. Well, I want to jump into today's episode. And, we're in that sort of strange period when we've got people wrapping up, obviously, their February tests. waiting to get those results. And then we've got July bar takers and some February 2020 bar takers, frankly, who have already begun their studies and starting to gear up a little bit. And it's always presents something of a challenge when I think about content for these podcast episodes, because I want something that's going to be relevant to the widest number of you possible. And I started thinking about, what are people Googling? What do they want to know about the bar exam? Now, our social media managers tell me about things called long tail keywords. My understanding of that is that you type in a really long search query into Google and you get a better result. And there are programs available that help you check out those long tail keywords. And we make use of some of those, obviously. And I thought I'd go in, it's always dangerous to let me near software like this, but I went into some of our software and I did a search for the last 12 months of what terms people are Googling or searching for when it comes to the bar exam. And I thought in today's episode, what I'd do is talk through some of those terms that come up repeatedly, some of the highest search terms, and just sort of give you my thoughts about why those are being searched for and some responses to the questions that people are asking. So sit back and let's see what's going on with this look into Google search terms. Well, the first thing I would tell you when I look at these search terms is that the overwhelming, I mean, far and away, the number one thing that's Googled about the bar exam has the word fail or failure or failed in it. Absolutely, unequivocally, that's the word that comes up. Failed bar exam is the term that gets searched for. And by the way, those of you that are in the bar review industry, thank you. I've just paid for your research. But in any event, that is the thing that people are more focused on than anything, more than when is the exam or what is the exam or how much does it cost to take the exam or what subjects are tested on the exam or how do I reach the bar examiners. Those are all queries, of course, but they're nowhere near the number of inquiries from all over the world that come in with something about failing the exam. So I want to focus primarily on those kinds of questions because they absolutely predominate the list. And I think it says something important that what people are most interested in right now is this fear of failing the bar exam. Now, the fear of failure has always been there, but I don't think it's ever been as prevalent as it is today. I would say anecdotally that there's more anxiety and negative anticipation around the bar than I've ever seen in the 30 years that I've been doing this. And there's good reason for that. The bar pass rates are at their lowest levels ever. There's more negative press about the bar exam. There's more of a sense of dread that people are not going to pass. And I know that when I was in law school, the expectation was that the bar exam was hard, but really almost everyone would pass. Today, that's really not true. I think today the feeling is the bar exam is nearly impossible in some places, and lots of people will fail, and in some places, nearly everybody will fail. In fact, I just saw a comment the other day from someone that said, absolutely no one in my law school passed the bar exam. I mean, that's unbelievable, but it's reality, and we see it happening, and so that's where we end up. In these searches. The first thing that comes up when we look at these Google searches is not just the general concept of failure, but really we can dig down a little bit deeper and we get this query, why did I fail the bar? Comes up over and over again. And that's interesting to me because it's really, I think, a not only legitimate question, but it's a heartfelt question. And it's one that I suspect is being asked with sort of a sense of desperation and confusion. And the reason I say that is that most people who have failed the bar have never failed anything significant in their lives. They got into law school, they graduated from law school, now they're taking this exam. And the vast majority of those people are taking a big box bar review course, and they are doing what they're told to do in that course. Now, people who failed the bar because they weren't smart enough, or they didn't work enough, or they weren't diligent in their studies, I think generally know that to be the case. They're not asking, why did I fail? It's obvious. I didn't pass, or I failed the exam because I didn't put in the time or the effort, or I didn't care, or I'm just not any good at taking tests. That might be a legitimate reason, although I think it's a small one here because you had to take a lot of tests to get in and out of law school. No, I think this question, why did I fail the bar, comes from people who say, in effect, I did exactly what I was told to do. I'm smart, I'm talented, I'm capable, I've been successful in the past. Why did I fail this exam? And I want to address that real briefly. I've done some other episodes and videos, and we'll link to those, about why people fail the bar exam. And some of those are very controversial because I'm actually willing to say some things that I suspect other people in the industry won't. But here's the primary thing that I think happens. People who fail the bar exam today fail the bar because they fail to understand what's really being tested. They are still treating the bar exam as though it is a law school exam, and the primary goal of that test is to show how much law they know. It's quaint, it's sweet, it's nice, it's romantic, it's historical. It is completely and utterly BS. That's not what the exam is doing at all. And you might say, well, it must be what the exam is doing because it's what my big box bar review told me to do. Yeah, I got to tell you, that big box bar review, they're not really your friend. They're not the people that are going to tell you what's going on because, frankly, it just doesn't matter to them. They've got you one way or the other. It doesn't make any sense for them to change what they've been teaching for 30, 40, 50 years just to adapt to the exam because they've still got most of the market. And so they just keep putting out the same old tired nonsense that they've been saying since really the bar exam began in its current form back in the 1970s. And so people go through law school, they sit down for a 6 or 7 week cram course, they get overwhelmed with material, they try to memorize and recite and show elements and go through all of these steps. They work diligently at it, they get to the bar exam, and whoa, none of those things turn out to be of very much importance to the examiners. Their skills completely useless. I liken it to going to get your driver's license and telling the driver's examiner that you want to start by beginning to show how you shoe horses. What are you talking about? There are no horses here. Well, there used to be. That's how we used to get around. Yeah, but we don't do that anymore. We drive cars now. And that is the equivalent of what goes on in the bar review industry today. And so people go through this blind rote following of a system that just doesn't work. Now, I know many of you that are watching or listening will say, but it must work because look at all the people that pass. And I would say, hey, it doesn't work. Look at all the people who fail. In fact, the majority of people who take the bar exam in 2017 and 2018, year long, failed the exam. The reality here is that this approach to taking the test that says I'm going to memorize, recite, show elements, issue spot, and so on is simply not acceptable. It doesn't work. And yet, because these companies that are large and clearly dominate the industry, have spent millions and millions and millions of dollars insinuating themselves into the law school world, the legal environment, that's become the standard. And frankly, their view is no matter what we did, we'd still own the pass rate, so there's really no incentive for us to get any better. It's sort of like saying everybody's got to use my service, so even if it's bad, doesn't really matter. And you can think of some companies that do that. Think cable companies, for example. Until there's a disruption to that part of the industry, bar reviews will continue to do the same old thing that they've done. Now, there are a few outliers like me, but let's be honest. I only deal with a small number of people relative to those big companies, and I'm just a little voice over here in the corner saying, hello, hello, pay attention over here. It works if you do something different. So when people say, why did I fail the bar exam? What happens is that they're not really taking into account that it's not their ability or their desire or their work ethic or habits, or it's not even really their skills when it comes to writing or test taking. It's really about the skill that they're bringing to the exam, what they're trying to demonstrate. In our webinar, I talk a lot about trying to hit a birthday piñata, you know, the one that's filled with candy. It's a really fun game. You blindfold someone, you spin them around, they swing the stick until they hit the piñata. But imagine trying to hit the piñata if you were in the wrong room. If while you were blindfolded and spun around, somebody moved the piñata to another room, it doesn't matter how hard you swing the stick, you're not going to hit the piñata. And that's what a lot of bar takers find themselves doing these days, is swinging very hard, working very hard, and then they fail. So what's the answer to why did I fail the bar exam? Well, you failed because you followed the wrong approach to studying. And when you put the right approach in front of those people, then they start to succeed, as we've seen over and over again. So I want to just say to you, if you're in that group of people that have failed the exam, who really know that you put everything into it, you did what the big box companies told you to do, then you really need to consider that the problem lies there and not with you. And I think if you can get to that point emotionally and mentally, then suddenly you begin to see that there are a lot of options. Celebration Bar Review is one of them, but we're not the only ones. There are options. There are more and more people out there saying, you know what they're telling you, what the big box bar reviews are telling you, is simply not true. Doesn't work. And so as people wake up to that, they go, oh, I see what's going on here. And then the results begin to change. So that's number one on the list in terms of Google searches. I found that very interesting. Close behind the question, why did I fail the bar, is another statement search, which is, I think I failed the bar. Now, this is interesting because we see a lot of those in this period of time that we're in right now. You've just taken the exam, you're waiting for results. It's a very stressful, very difficult time for a lot of people. And we start this process of second guessing ourselves, second guessing the test, doing what's called a postmortem on the exam. Now, I've mentioned in other places the episode and the video I did about taking the postmortem on the exam, and we'll link to that again. But I think it's important to recognize that for a lot of people, this idea of second guessing themselves is really tormenting. I think I failed the exam. What do I do now? Well, I think one of the things that you do is you try to clear your head a little bit. You get it back into the stream of life. You get back to your job and to your family, to the things that matter to you, and you put the exam away for a while. I know that there are those people that think that they should jump right back in the day after the test and start studying for the next one. I'm not really a big fan of that. I think you need some downtime, some decompression time, some time to reflect on what's happened. In fact, I think you need some time to just get past the stress of the test generally so that you can begin to move forward if you need to when the next set of results come out. Now, I recognize, and I have written about the fact that some bar jurisdictions, like California in particular, give very little time between when they produce the results and the next bar exam. And I think that's traditionally and typically unfair. I don't think a student in California is entitled to a month less study time on the multi-state than a student in Florida, but that's the reality that we've got. Still, I have found over and over again that there is enough time to get your results and then begin your studies and pass the next bar exam. And we see that happen exam after exam. It can be done. But the key is, number one, changing what you're doing. So that's obvious. And secondly is that when the results come out, if you think you failed, prepare yourself for that. When the results come out, you don't have the luxury of a long time to grieve the results. You literally have to get back in quickly. And so one of the things you can do while you're waiting for results is to do your homework. Maybe it's watching or listening to podcasts like these, or doing some checking of different courses. Maybe it's watching the testimonial videos that we've done with past successful students. I'll tell you that the 75 or 80 that we've got up there right now represent an extraordinary variety of people and circumstances, and it's pretty good odds that you'll find somebody that's in a similar situation to yours. It's great to hear what they did and how they got over those humps. My point is that you should emotionally prepare yourself so that when the results come, if they're not favorable, you are ready to get started right away. The most disappointing thing to me is someone that gets their results and then they wait 2 or 3 weeks to make a decision to start again because they're so emotionally devastated by what happened before. And so I would encourage you, if you think that you failed, that's what you ought to be doing right now. Should you be going back and memorizing more and studying more and reading more? No, it's really not very useful. You don't know if you passed or failed. You don't know why you passed or failed. There's no direction. You're just doing what you did before. It might make you feel better in the short run, but in my experience, most people who are in that situation really go at it half-heartedly. It's not very effective studying, and then they just feel more burned out and more tired. Use this time to refresh yourself, to relax, to reconnect with the world, as I said. And then when the results come out, if they're favorable, yay. And if they're not favorable, then you've already done the pre-grieving, if you will, and you're ready to get on and get back to work. So that's the one of the terms that we see. I think I failed the bar. Another one that goes along with that is this search that says, how do I get over failing? Now what do I do? Some variation of that. Now what do I do that I've learned that I failed? Well, as I just said, I think one of the most important things to do is to move ahead with your study plan. But in anticipation of that, you may want to think about what jurisdiction you want to sit in. If you've been in a jurisdiction like California or Florida that's got a very low pass rate and a very difficult exam, if you're qualified, think about taking the uniform bar exam. It's available in 33 plus states. It's a lower pass rate generally. In fact, the difference between the passing score in New York and California is 22 points. That's a huge difference. And we've got plenty of videos we've done with students that took that philosophy, left Florida, left California, and passed even after they had taken those exams many, many times, 8, 9, 10 times, and then pass the UBE, and they start their career and their practice. So that's one practical thing I think you can do. Think about jurisdictions, think about that part of it. Secondly, think about what kind of a bar review preparation course you want to take. Do you want something that's got more personal attention? Do you want something that you can do at home? Do you want something that lets you study for a longer period of time? Do you want a course that's going to continue to tell you to memorize and recite elements, or do you want a course that takes a different approach? No one approach is right for everyone, and we're certainly not right for everyone, but I far prefer that people do their due diligence before the results come out, as we were just talking about, so that when you get your results, you're ready to go. Now, if you expected to pass and you got blindsided by failing the bar, that makes it much harder. And I think sometimes when we see this note, this search, how do I get over failing? Well, you cry it out, you yell it out, you grieve about it. There's a lot of things you do, but you have to do them really quickly, and you got to get on with your life. One of the best ways to get on with your life is to do something different. That's why we call our webinar Do Something Different. You got to change your focus and move right on to the new thing ahead of you. When you sit there and you wallow in what happened, and I don't mean that in a mean way, it's a very real thing. But if you continue to replay the exam in your mind, it doesn't change anything. It makes you feel bad, and you're just stuck. And I think getting out of stuck is what's really important for people. If you've got something that really excites you, if you can see a reason that doing something different would make a difference, using tools like photo reading and mind maps and paraliminals in a course like ours, for a lot of people is very exciting. It's a new skill. It's a new set of learning that they can apply in a wide range of their life. Those things create excitement, and they get our focus off of the past and move it to the future. And that makes a big difference. And so I think the now what question is decide what exam you're going to take, when you're going to take it, and who you're going to study with, and then get on with it. If you're procrastinating, you're just dooming yourself to failure. Because the one sure thing I can tell you is that if you don't have enough time to study, you won't pass the exam. And look, I know there are people out there that say, oh, you can study with just a couple of weeks, or put in a couple of weekends, or use our magic algorithm and everything will be great and you won't have to put in much study at all. Yeah, in the old days, they used to call those people the traveling snake oil salesman. This will cure whatever ails you. No, it won't. It's not going to happen. And I know that people are desperate for any solution. But ultimately, you got to look at the people that have been around long enough in this industry that have some credibility, that have been doing it long enough and can point to a track record of success. I have heard people talk about these outrageous pass rates of their courses, and I say, how long have they been in business? Oh, I think this was their first year. Yeah, I don't think that's going to work. And so the reality here is that you have to move on, but move on with people that are reputable, companies that are reputable, and strategies that are reputable. And I think if you're doing that, that's probably your best way of getting over the result, is to move forward with your life. I think it is absolutely critical that you have that forward-facing focus. Now, there are several other search queries that are made that are very similar to this, and I want to just cover them generally. One of the ones that we saw a lot of is, what do you do after you fail? You cry, you get mad, you wonder what's happened, you think about your career choices, and then you put on your best face and you march out into the world and you go forward. I mean, that's the answer. We've done a whole video on what do you do after you fail, and again, we'll link to that. But I think it goes back to all the things I was just saying about taking your strategy and deciding how to move forward. Another related question to that is, what happens when you fail the exam? Well, when you fail the exam, you get a letter from the bar examiners telling you that you failed, and depending on the jurisdiction, you get some information, a little bit of information, or no information. And that's always frustrating. If you're in a jurisdiction like Georgia, you are getting virtually no information at all. A multi-state score, and that's it. If you're in other jurisdictions, you're getting more detailed information. Some jurisdictions will even send you copies of your written work, either on demand or automatically. And I think it's important when you get that information to break it down and look at it. But one of the things that's really important is that you understand how to read your score sheet. I constantly hear from students from around the country who don't know how to read their score sheets. They don't know what the score sheets mean. And it's not because they're stupid. It's because the score sheets are oblique at best in some states. So I think it's important that you have someone that can actually interpret that for you. If you're in a course like ours, we do that automatically. But if you're not in our course, I think it's important that you find somebody that's really knowledgeable. And by really knowledgeable, I don't mean on Google or on Facebook or on a Reddit or a subreddit thread. The amount of misinformation in social media about the bar exam is really staggering. I suppose that's probably true in all fields. But there are so many people that have no idea what they're talking about, who make these preposterous claims about what scores mean. That I think you want to be very careful about that. So I would go to someone reputable, maybe somebody in your law school, or if you took a big box bar review, contact them. It's hit or miss, frankly. Sometimes they know what they're talking about in a jurisdiction, sometimes they don't. But I think it's important that you get some feedback on what your scores were and what they mean. The worst thing you can do is to misinterpret your scores in the sense that you think they're telling you to do something in one area when in fact you were okay in that part of the exam and it's something else entirely. For example, I hear from students who will tell me about their scores and they'll say, well, so based on those scores, what I have to do obviously is really improve my essays. And they're telling me that they've got a multi-state score that was 105 scaled. Well, there's no jurisdiction in the world where 105 scaled multi-state score is going to pass, but they don't understand the importance of that. And so we have to break that back down and show what it takes for their jurisdiction or how many questions they really had to get correct in order to be passing. So I think it's important to really understand when you fail what the reasons are. Now, if you're in one of those jurisdictions where they give you no information, well, unfortunately, there's not much you can do. At that point, I think the best thing to do is just move forward, but also move forward with the notion that you've got to do things differently. And the more times you take the test and the more times you fail the exam, the more you dig yourself into the same repetitive pattern, the more likely it is you'll continue to fail. That is the classic definition of insanity. And so if you're going to get off the hamster wheel, you've really got to do things differently. And so that would be my encouragement to you. When you fail, you need to get back in, you need to re-enroll, you need to set that up, the dates and get everything set. You need to make all of the arrangements again. And that is very hard to do emotionally, but you got to do it. And depending on when you get your results, if you're going to sit for the very next administration of the exam, you have very little time to do that. Now, for some people, the delay of results and the time it takes to process those results emotionally just make it impossible to pick up the next exam. And if that's so, you set for the exam after that, but begin your studies now. Don't wait. I will tell you this over and over and over again. The people who wait fail. Procrastination equals failure, almost exclusively, almost entirely, almost absolutely. People who procrastinate starting their studies have a much lower success rate than the people that just get in and do it. So if you get your results from February 2019 exam and it is sometime in May and you say to yourself, I can't take the exam in July, fine. Take the exam in February 2020, but start studying now. Don't say to yourself, oh, I'm going to wait until, July or August. Well, that's summertime and then it's the fall and gosh, I love the fall and it's Halloween and I love Halloween and oh, look, Thanksgiving, I'll start after Thanksgiving and then it's Christmas and New Year's and oh my gosh, here we are back again, 7 weeks to the bar exam and you're right back in the same situation. So don't do that. Don't procrastinate. So what happens when you fail? You got to get started again. Now, another question, search engine query that comes up says something about trouble passing the bar. I'm having trouble passing the bar. Yeah, I think that is a pretty common search because people begin to recognize in their studies that something isn't right. I'm having trouble passing the bar. And I think, again, it suggests that there should be a reason for this that goes beyond just your work ethic or your time. I think it's a given that most people that are studying for the bar, and certainly those of you watching or listening to a podcast about the bar exam, are dedicated to what you're doing. You're willing to put in the time and the effort. And so I don't think that's your problem. I also don't believe that you're not smart enough. Now, I recognize that there is an incredible amount being written and said and posted online and in media and in publications. Everybody's an expert on why bar students and lawyers are so much dumber today than they were before. I got to tell you, I've been teaching law students for 3 decades now. The students today are no more intelligent or less intelligent than they were 30 years ago. It's just a fallacy. And I think that what happens is that we begin to think of it really in terms, and I'm going to put this out very candidly, I think this is in terms of white male privilege. As a white male, we have an expectation of what smart means. But for a woman of color who's been raising a family and studying for law school and taking the bar, there is a wisdom and a knowledge there that I will never have. And frankly, to say that that student is less qualified than somebody that looks or sounds like me is absurd. They are different levels of learning, different levels of understanding, different levels of conceptual reality. And so I don't think that one student is less capable than another in this regard. It's one of the reasons why when we do our interviews with successful students, we try really hard to show a wide range of people, in part because that's what our student mix is, but also because I think it's so important to be able to see somebody that looks like you, sounds like you, has a life story like yours. Maybe it's a grandparent who's taken the bar exam and passed at an age that you would never imagine. Or maybe it's somebody with a young family and all sorts of challenges. Maybe it's somebody that's got physical challenges that they've faced. It could be a wide range of things. And yet they're all able to pass the bar. So this idea of I'm having trouble passing the bar because there's something wrong with me is simply an acceptance that the only people that are deserving of passing the bar are the people that went to top 25 law schools, graduated in the top half of their class, and are privileged. And that is absolute and utter nonsense. And we need to disabuse ourselves of that. We need to stop accepting that as a reality. And so when you hear and read all of these comments about why law school applicants just aren't as smart as they used to be, that's just crazy stuff. That's just people saying we're different. The law school graduates of today look different than they did. There were fewer women in my class of law school than there are today. There were certainly fewer adults with families. In fact, I was one of those, and there were a group of us at a big law school at Georgetown, and we huddled together because we were too old to see the board from a distance. So we gathered together as a study group. But in a big section of a couple hundred people, there were 5 of us. 5 that were really non-traditional students in a daytime traditional program. Can you imagine that today? Wouldn't happen. And the reality is that our notions of what a good law student is or a good lawyer is have changed dramatically. So don't buy into the mythology that just because you don't look like a TV lawyer in the old days, you're not Matlock, if you will, means that you're not capable. And I think that that's part of what happens when people get into this idea of, why am I having trouble passing the bar? Well, you're having trouble passing the bar for reasons that have very little to do with your ability or your desire or your willingness. They have a lot more to do with your inability to function and to focus on what's really being tested on the exam. So trouble passing the bar is a big one. We see it time and time again as a search term, and I think it's kind of interesting to see what that's all about. There are a couple of other frequently searched terms that I want to just briefly cover in this. I think we could probably go on for a long time. There's a lot of different things that people search, obviously, on Google. But one of the areas that we got some searches for were things that asked, what's the easiest bar exam state or the hardest bar exam state? And I think I can answer that pretty straightforwardly. The easiest states to pass the bar exam right now would be any of the UBE jurisdictions, particularly those that have a passing score of 260. Now, right now, there are 6 of those states: Alabama, Minnesota, Missouri, New Mexico, and North Dakota. That doesn't mean you have to go to those states to take the exam, but if you take the UBE in any jurisdiction and you get a 260 or higher, those 6 states would all accept your score of 260, and you could, in fact, be admitted to them if you met their other requirements. So I would say that is the easiest set of states to be in. The UBE generally is the easiest grouping of states and certainly has the widest applicability. In terms of the hardest bar exams, it's no surprise. California is by far the hardest. I would say that's followed pretty closely by Florida, Georgia, and Texas. If you want to know why we teach California, Florida, Texas, and Georgia, and the UBE, now you know. We take the hardest exams and the easiest exam. But if you are in Florida or California, you already know these are very difficult exams, very low pass rates, and no particular expectation in the near future that they would switch to the UBE or that they would change their passing scores or make any significant changes. Now, I will say that Texas is moving to the UBE in February 2021, and so we are advising students to sit out the 2020 Texas bar exams and instead focus on the UBE in 2021. That's going to be a much easier test in Texas, going from 2.5 days to 2 days, getting rid of Texas P&E, getting rid of oil and gas, and a whole lot of other things. So going to be a big switch coming there. And Texas isn't the only state switching to the uniform bar exam. Ohio is making the switch. A lot of other states are coming on board there. So I think that We're going to see a smaller and smaller grouping of states that stay outside the UBE orbit. California and Florida are going to be the notable exceptions in staying out. Georgia is an interesting question. Georgia may very well go to the UBE at some point. I think it's one of those jurisdictions that as the state has grown, they're really having to revise and think about their bar exam in a way that makes it more contemporary and less anachronistic. And I would say that's a good way to describe the way Georgia's tested for many, many decades now. So kind of interesting there. So easiest and hardest states, hope that helps. Another set of search queries that were made were questions about, oh, why do I keep failing? And I thought that this was an interesting one because the answer really is you keep failing because you keep doing the same things. If you keep studying the same way, using the same approaches, you're going to keep failing. The bar examiners are actually quite proud of the fact that they have consistent outputs for consistent inputs. In other words, they don't have to change the scale on the multi-state very much from test to test because it pretty much accurately reflects what people are putting into the test itself. As a result, if you prepare the same way and approach the exam the same way, you can expect to get about the same score most every time. That's one of the reasons when students come to us and they then get increases of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, as much as 70 points because of the techniques that we use like photo reading. The bar examiners are often very suspicious of that because you don't typically see those big spike jumps. And it's not a gimmick, it's just a completely different way of approaching the exam could lead to a completely different result. And so I think that one of the answers to that question of why do I keep failing is because if I were Google, I'd type back and say, because you keep doing the same stupid things. Google's too nice to say that though, aren't they? Anyway, I think if you're going to change that mindset, if you're going to change that outcome, you've got to start by changing your mindset. You've got to change what you're doing to get a different result. And so that's the answer that I would see to that query. And then the last one that I wanted to just talk about very briefly is a query that comes up is who fails the bar? Now, there are lots of Google search queries about did a famous person fail the bar? And depending on your politics, you either pick a liberal icon or a conservative icon and ask if they failed the bar. That's not the kind of question that I'm looking at here. What I'm looking at is people asking what kinds of people, who generally fails the bar. We did a whole video on who fails the bar, the 5 people that are not likely to pass. And it's probably the most controversial video I've ever done because I actually say some things that really offended some people. I said, for example, if you don't speak English well, you're probably going to fail the bar. Now, that's a factual reality, but it upset a lot of people. I said, if you keep trying to use memorization and recitation, you're probably going to fail the bar. That upset another group of people. And you can see as we went down the list, people that got very offended and then made comments about my nose or my ears or my hair, because that certainly made sense in the context of what I was talking about. In any event, the point I want to make here is that everybody's story as to why they fail the bar is different, but there are some commonalities. And if you are in a situation where you don't have enough time, you're going to fail the bar. If you don't take a proactive approach to your study and you passively hit your studies, you're probably going to fail the bar. If you try to memorize and recite elements and you don't really clarify what it is that you're being asked to do on the exam, statistically, you're probably going to fail the bar. If you've been failing the bar a number of times and you keep doing what you were doing before, you're going to fail the bar. These are all realities, and they're not easy things to talk about. But I think the point is that when people make that search, what they're really saying is, what do I have to do now to pass the bar? And so the question I think really that we should be asking is, what does it take to pass the bar? And when you get to the question of what it takes to pass the bar, the answer is actually more simple than people realize. It's the ability to take a problem, break it down into the arguments that would be made, and then use the law as you understand it, and then analyze those steps. And it's really no more complicated than doing that process. Here's the problem, here's the law as it applies, and here's the conclusion that I would reach. Trying to do more than that is not necessary. You don't have to spot every issue on an essay or a performance test. You just have to do the task that's put in front of you. You don't have to be perfect on the multi-state. You just have to be above average. You don't have to memorize all the rules and all the elements of all the pages of the outlines. You just have to have a sense of what's going on and then be able to answer with a common sense, intuitive approach. That's too simple for some people, and so they try to make it difficult and they try to make it harder, and then they end up asking, why do I keep failing? There are some people that type into the Google search box, which course has the highest bar pass rate, or what's the best bar prep? And there's obviously lots of different responses to the what's the best bar prep. But when it comes to who has the highest pass rate, I would just point out to you that no one actually can define a pass rate anymore. It's not like the days when someone came to a course and that's all they had, and they did that one course and we all knew who had taken the exam in that small jurisdiction, and we could identify bar takers versus bar passers. Today, you've got people using an amalgam of materials and approaches. Some people buy a course and never use it. Some people use a borrowed course. Some people don't do anything like that. Some people don't report their results. Many people don't report their results. And the bar examiners don't report results by bar exam courses. All of which is to say, when you hear a bar review course touting a specific percentage pass rate, I would look at that with a great deal of skepticism. I don't think any reputable bar course does that. I think there are newcomers to the field that periodically pop up and make outrageous claims. You should be very cautious about outrageous claims, particularly if they can't be backed up with any kind of empirical evidence. I think the best way to understand a bar pass rate is to look at the kinds of people that are in the course and how do they do and what do they have to say about the course. That's why we make such a point of putting our testimonial videos out on our site so that you can see the kinds of people that we work with and the stories that they have and the successes that they have. Doesn't mean that everyone that comes to us will pass the bar, but it does mean that we feel very confident that we can help anyone pass who comes to us. And I think there's a distinction there. So if you're just looking for who's got the best bar pass rate, well, what you're going to find in a Google search term will probably be somebody that lies about it, and they put in an outrageous number. And they're probably violating a whole slew of advertising norms and rules. But that's never stopped people in this industry before. So I would just be cautious and skeptical of that kind of information. I don't think choosing a bar prep course based on the highest pass rate is going to do you any good. You can't tell what the pass rate is. Now, I will say you can tell what pass rate gets attached to the big box bar reviews because they prepare well over 90% of the bar takers in America. So if you want to know what Barbary or Kaplan or Themis pass rate is for California or Florida, it's very simple. It's the state official pass rate for all bar takers. That's the number that they're really attached to. And the truth is, they're not going to try and tell you any differently about that. They operate ethically, and they would never try to claim something different. But I think when you start seeing companies trying to tell you that there's some dramatic difference between their score and everyone else's, you've got to look at that with some degree of skepticism, unless they've got the experience and the expertise and the ability to back it up. So I say all that simply to tell you that there aren't many courses like ours that have been around for 3 decades that have been working with students and can produce a portfolio of work where you would say, yeah, that looks like me and that person passed and I think I can do that. And if that does represent you, then I hope you'll type into the Google search bar Celebration Bar Review. How do I contact them? We'd love to talk to you, love to find out your story and to see how we could help you make the next bar exam your last bar exam. Well, I hope that's helpful to you. I hope that you enjoyed that dip into the Google search world. And we'll look forward to seeing you again next week as we come back on our podcast episodes. We'll be starting to gear up towards the July exams. We've got lots of great new content on the way to you. Just want to remind you that we do have our free webinar. And now you understand the title, Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam, coming up Thursday at 7 p.m. Register at celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. And we'll see you at the webinar, and we'll see you along the extra mile, and hopefully we'll see you on the pass list real soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.